The courtroom felt colder than usual that day, as if every heart inside had already passed judgment long before the trial began. Standing alone, her fingers gripping tightly against the edge of the defendant's table, was Emily Carter, a young black girl who appeared no different from any ordinary high school student. Her quiet dignity masked a storm of emotions beneath the surface. Fear, sadness, and a simmering anger at the hidden prejudices she knew were silently stacked against her. Across the room sat Kyle Wilson, leaning comfortably beside his father, Daniel Wilson, one of the most influential white businessmen in town. Kyle's calmness was unsettling. The way his eyes carried a quiet arrogance, confident that his wealth and privilege had already determined the outcome. Emily felt her heart tighten painfully. She understood very clearly. In this moment, justice felt like a distant, unattainable dream. She lifted her gaze briefly toward the gallery, and the sea of faces staring back at her offered no comfort. She recognized their judgment, unspoken but sharp, assuming she was just another troubled, violent black teenager, quick to anger and aggression. Emily wondered bitterly if any of them had ever questioned their own biases, or if her story was already written in their minds from the moment she walked through that courtroom door. Her thoughts drifted for a moment, pulled back to the painful memory of Marcus, her younger brother. Marcus had died from a drug overdose at the very same high school she now stood accused in. An innocent victim of a dangerous network that had gone unchecked for far too long. It was Marcus's death that had driven her to accept the dangerous assignment, to go undercover, to sacrifice months of her life, to risk everything just to protect others from a similar fate. Yet now, despite all she'd done, she stood accused, misunderstood, and utterly alone. Emily Carter, the judge's voice cut through her memories, firm and cool, pulling her sharply back into the harsh reality. You stand accused of violently assaulting Kyle Wilson, causing severe bodily harm. Do you understand the seriousness of these charges? Emily took a deep, steadying breath, and for a heartbeat, silence engulfed the room. All eyes fixed upon her, expecting anger, excuses, perhaps even tears. But Emily knew this was no longer about her. It was about truth, about justice, no matter the cost. A quiet courage rose within her, stronger than her fear. Yes, Your Honor, Emily finally spoke, her voice gentle yet clear, resonating through the courtroom. I understand exactly how serious this appears, but nothing about this situation is what it seems. I stand before you today holding on to a secret that changes everything you think you know. A tense hush settled over the courtroom, anticipation filling the air as every person leaned forward slightly, waiting for her next words. Emily raised her head proudly, her eyes bright with determination, hiding neither her vulnerability nor her strength. She knew that after today, there would be no turning back. The fight for truth had officially begun. The courtroom stood utterly still, suspended in stunned silence at Emily's revelation. I'm not a student. I'm an undercover police officer, she repeated gently, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. A quiet murmur rippled through the room, disbelief settling in faces around her. She could sense their skepticism, the subtle shifting of eyes, brows knitted together in doubt. Across the room, Kyle Wilson's arrogant composure faltered briefly, revealing a flicker of unease he quickly masked. Emily knew exactly why. The power Kyle had relied on was suddenly shaken by her unexpected truth. Emily felt her chest tighten as vivid memories of the past few months came rushing back. Going undercover at Lincoln High had never been easy. Every morning, she had stepped into a role, carefully transforming herself into an ordinary teenager. A mask she wore so convincingly, no one ever looked beyond it. But beneath that mask was constant vigilance, exhausting caution, and the relentless weight of responsibility. The hallways of Lincoln High had become a silent battleground for her. Day after day, Emily navigated a minefield of whispered comments, subtle glances, and hidden prejudice. She was well aware of the hushed conversations behind her back, the casual assumptions disguised as harmless banter. Each remark quietly stung, a painful reminder of the silent barriers she faced simply because of who she was. Yet Emily endured it all, reminding herself that this mission was bigger than her own pain. She was here for Marcus, her younger brother, and for countless others who were still at risk. But the hardest part was the isolation. Emily vividly remembered one night in particular. A cold evening when she sat alone in her small apartment, phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her mother's voice had been warm and comforting on the other end of the line, asking about school, friends, ordinary teenage things. Emily had swallowed her tears, forced laughter into her voice, lying effortlessly about a reality she wished she could escape. When the call ended, silence returned, deeper and lonelier than before. In school, she pretended friendships, smiled through interactions, and maintained a delicate balance between invisibility and acceptance. Yet all the while she felt utterly alone. She wanted desperately to share her burden, to release just a fraction of her truth to someone, anyone, but secrecy bound her tightly. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was Kyle who eventually shattered that fragile balance. Emily's suspicions about him had grown steadily stronger over weeks. Charming and privileged, Kyle walked through life with the quiet arrogance of someone who knew exactly how untouchable he was. Beneath his polished appearance, Emily had quickly uncovered the disturbing truth. Kyle was deeply embedded in the drug network poisoning the school. She remembered the day clearly. After class, Kyle had approached her with his usual disarming smile, casually asking if they could talk privately. Emily's instincts warned her, but she'd cautiously followed him to a secluded hallway, the school suddenly empty and quiet around them. There, Kyle's smile vanished, replaced by cold suspicion. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he'd whispered, his voice sharp and menacing. He stepped closer, boxing her into a corner. "Did you really believe you could fool me? I know who you are, Emily, or should I say, Officer Carter." Her heart had stopped momentarily, fear tightening her throat. How had he found out? Kyle's eyes narrowed as he leaned in, speaking slowly, deliberately. "You're nothing. Nobody will believe you over me. You should have stayed in your place." In an instant, Emily recognized the threat, saw his intention clearly in his clenched fists. As he lunged forward, instinct and training took over. Emily moved swiftly, defending herself efficiently, and Kyle hit the ground, stunned and furious. But the relief she felt was fleeting. Moments later, as security guards rushed toward them, Kyle instantly transformed himself into the victim, his eyes wide with mock fear, pointing accusingly at Emily. The painful irony wasn't lost on her. She'd fought to protect others, yet here she stood accused, powerless against the force of Kyle's privilege. His family's wealth and influence twisted the truth effortlessly, labeling Emily as the attacker, a violent girl who couldn't control herself. She realized bitterly, as she stood there, how tightly prejudice and power were interwoven, reinforcing each other and making real justice nearly impossible to achieve. Now, standing before the judge, Emily felt a quiet strength rising within her, surpassing her fear. She met the judge's cautious gaze directly, seeing the hesitation and uncertainty in his expression. For the first time, there was a spark of hope. Her secret was finally out, and though the fight ahead was uncertain and dangerous, Emily felt ready. She knew there was no turning back now. Emily didn't say a word as the unmarked police car glided through the darkness, carrying her farther from the courtroom and deeper into uncertainty. Her reflection shimmered dimly in the car window, blurred by passing streetlights and the faint drizzle beginning outside. Samuel Grant, her captain and trusted mentor, drove silently beside her. Neither of them spoke, each lost in their thoughts, yet the heavy silence said everything. When they finally pulled up to the safe house, a modest bungalow hidden in a sleepy suburban neighborhood, Emily felt a faint sense of relief, though it quickly faded beneath a lingering unease. At first glance, the home seemed reassuringly ordinary. A small porch, a gently flickering porch lamp, neatly trimmed bushes, curtains drawn tight. It was perfectly designed to appear unremarkable, unnoticed, forgotten by anyone passing by. Grant carefully guided Emily inside, methodically inspecting every lock, window, and corner of the small house before turning to face her. His voice was gentle, comforting, yet Emily noticed a subtle tension in his eyes, as if even he couldn't fully mask his concern. "You'll be safe here," he assured her softly, placing a secure phone into her hand. "Contact me if anything feels off. We'll talk again tomorrow. Try to rest." She nodded silently as he left, the reinforced door closing firmly behind him. Emily found herself alone again, and silence pressed in heavily, echoing loudly in her ears. Her footsteps sounded muffled on the thick, worn carpet as she moved slowly into the living room, her eyes carefully taking in her new surroundings. A simple couch, a small table, an old bookshelf lined with forgotten novels. Each detail seemed carefully chosen to inspire anonymity, safety. Yet her anxiety only grew sharper with every passing second. She sank onto the couch, briefly closing her eyes, but the brief stillness brought no relief. Instead, a creeping doubt began whispering at the edge of her mind. Could she truly trust anyone now, even Grant? She had always relied on his strength, his guidance, yet recent events had shaken her confidence in everything she'd known. The painful realization hit her. Trust was now a luxury she simply couldn't afford. Exhaling softly, Emily stood, intending to move toward the bedroom, hoping that sleep might quiet her racing thoughts. But as she passed the small bookshelf along the wall, a tiny red glint caught her eye. She paused, heart suddenly pounding, instincts sharply alert. Carefully, cautiously, she moved closer, pulling away one of the dusty books. Hidden discreetly behind it was a tiny camera, its red indicator blinking steadily like a silent heartbeat. Emily felt ice flood her veins, a chill of betrayal so sharp it took her breath away. The safe house was compromised. Someone had been watching her from the moment she stepped inside. The questions rushed through her mind, frantic and frightening. Who had placed this here? Who else knew she was at this house? A devastating thought struck her. Could Grant himself have known? The suspicion felt like a knife twisting deep within her. She quickly shook the thought away, unwilling to accept it. But the seed of doubt had already taken root. Emily sank heavily onto the couch, gripping the small camera in her trembling hand. A crushing loneliness swept through her, deeper than she'd ever known. She had fought so hard, endured months undercover, navigated a maze of subtle prejudice and powerful adversaries. But nothing had prepared her for this. The devastating feeling of betrayal from within her own ranks, the painful possibility that even those she trusted most might have turned against her. She longed suddenly for her mother's voice, for the simple comfort of someone who truly believed in her, unconditionally. But she couldn't call home now. She couldn't risk pulling those she loved into danger. She was utterly alone, forced to rely only upon herself. A painful question echoed sharply in her thoughts. Who can I really trust now? She felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely, steadying herself. Emily took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. She knew this wasn't merely about her own safety anymore. This was a fight against something darker, deeper, a hidden enemy within the very institution she dedicated her life to serving. And if trust was now shattered, she'd have to rebuild her strength from within. Her fingers tightened around the secure phone Grant had given her. She stared at it, hesitating, unsure if she could risk contacting him, unsure if she could trust anyone ever again. In the heavy silence of that small, compromised safe house, Emily realized with crystal clarity that her fight had only just begun, and it would be a battle unlike anything she had faced before. Emily sat frozen, staring numbly at the tiny blinking camera still clutched in her hand. Her heart felt heavier with every passing second, the weight of betrayal pressing down like an invisible, crushing force. The quiet hum of the empty house seemed to amplify the chaos in her thoughts. Who knew about this safe house? Who could she possibly trust now? Just then, her phone buzzed sharply, breaking the oppressive silence. It was Captain Grant calling again. Emily hesitated, her fingers hovering uncertainly above the phone, fear and doubt swirling inside her chest. Yet something deeper, a faint, desperate hope pushed her forward. She picked up. "Grant," she whispered hoarsely, struggling to hide the tremble in her voice. Someone planted a camera in the safe house. Grant was silent for a long, heavy moment. When he spoke, his voice was strained, tight with anger and disbelief. "Emily, we have a leak. Someone close. Someone inside our own team is trying to sabotage you. We're working on it now, but I need you to stay calm." "Who could it be, Grant?" Emily interrupted, desperation evident in her voice. "Who would do this?" He hesitated again, clearly reluctant. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with pain. "We traced the surveillance equipment to someone within the department. Emily, it's Peter Callahan." The words hit Emily like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. Her entire world tilted sideways, the air around her suddenly too thin to breathe. Peter Callahan, The man who'd guided her through every difficult step when she first joined the force. The seasoned detective who had shielded her countless times from subtle prejudice and thinly veiled insults. How could this be? Her mind flashed instantly to memories of those first uncertain days, fresh out of the academy, a young black woman in a precinct dominated by people who didn't always want her there. She could almost feel again the reassuring weight of Callahan's hand on her shoulder during those early days, the steadiness of his voice as he whispered quietly to her after overhearing a cruel joke at her expense. "Don't listen to them, Emily. You belong here. You're stronger than their ignorance." Emily had believed him then. He had been her mentor, her protector, the one person who saw past her race, who championed her worth openly, shielding her from judgment and prejudice. Callahan had given her hope, taught her to believe in herself, taught her that justice was blind to color. But now, this same man had betrayed her. The thought seared through her heart, tearing at the trust she had built so carefully. How long had he been against her? Was all his kindness just a lie? Emily's mind spiraled into a storm of doubt and pain. A bitter, aching question whispered deep inside her heart. Did he turn on me because of who I am? Was it always about race, beneath it all? She could feel tears welling, but forced them down. She refused to break, not yet, not while Grant was still on the line. She swallowed hard, managing a quiet reply. "Are you sure? It can't be him. Callahan's always protected me." "I wish I was wrong, Emily," Grant said softly, his voice heavy with regret. "Believe me, I'd give anything to be wrong about this." Emily closed her eyes tightly, feeling the sting of tears fighting to escape. She knew Grant was telling the truth, yet accepting that truth was agony, as painful as losing Marcus all over again. She hung up the phone without another word, letting it slip from her fingers onto the couch beside her. She needed someone to lean on, someone who wouldn't judge or betray. Instinctively, Emily reached for her personal phone, her thumb hovering over the familiar name, Mom. She hesitated, tears blurring her vision. She knew she couldn't say much, couldn't risk revealing the truth, but she needed the sound of her mother's voice, warm, strong, comforting. The phone rang softly, and Emily's heart tightened when her mother answered gently. "Emily? Baby, are you okay?" Emily drew in a shaky breath, forcing strength into her voice. "Everything's fine, Mom. I just wanted to hear your voice." Her mother paused briefly, sensing something deeper, but choosing to comfort instead of pry. "You're strong, sweetheart," her mother said gently, her voice warm with unconditional love. "Whatever it is you're carrying, you're never truly alone. I'm here." Emily whispered a trembling goodbye, ending the call quickly before the flood of tears finally broke free. Alone once more in the empty room, Emily allowed herself to weep silently, her shoulders shaking under the weight of loneliness and heartbreak. Her mentor, her friend, the one person who'd given her courage in a world filled with hidden prejudices, had betrayed her trust. The thought was devastating. Yet within the heartbreak, a new resolve quietly emerged, fragile but determined. She would not let betrayal defeat her. Emily knew she had to understand why Callahan did this. Why a man who had fought alongside her against injustice for years had suddenly turned against everything he once stood for. As the room darkened around her, Emily wiped away her tears, her gaze stealing with quiet strength. She would find answers, no matter how painful. Because this battle was not only about saving herself, it was about protecting others like Marcus, others whose voices had been silenced or forgotten. She was their voice now, and she refused to let it be silenced by betrayal. Emily spent hours immersed in the dim glow of her laptop, eyes strained and burning from fatigue, yet unable to pull away from the tangled web unfolding before her. Files, recordings, phone logs, all evidence she'd secretly accessed, hoping desperately to uncover who was pulling the strings behind Kyle and Callahan. Beside her, the small lamp illuminated notes scattered across the table, names and dates circling endlessly in her mind. Then, as her gaze skimmed over a familiar phone number, her breath caught sharply. Her pulse quickened, disbelief and dread spreading icy fingers through her heart. The phone number Callahan had been calling repeatedly, the hidden contact at the center of it all, traced back directly to a single individual. Richard Bennett. Emily's breath faltered, her mind racing in disbelief. Richard Bennett wasn't just any name. He was a respected philanthropist, a prominent, wealthy white businessman celebrated throughout the city. Bennett was always there, in the newspapers, on TV screens, at charity galas, proudly funding Lincoln High, cutting ribbons, shaking hands, always smiling warmly, always projecting generosity and kindness. To everyone else, he was a hero, a savior whose generosity kept classrooms open and dreams alive. Emily herself had admired him once, genuinely believing his carefully crafted public persona. Now, that carefully constructed image shattered painfully before her eyes. A wave of nausea swept over her as she connected the dots, realizing Bennett's true intentions. Behind that carefully maintained image of a caring benefactor lay ruthless manipulation, exploiting vulnerable students like Marcus, her own brother, to build his empire. Emily's heart ached bitterly at the realization that her brother's life and countless others had been silently destroyed by a man society admired and trusted unconditionally. Anger flared sharply within Emily, an anger raw and visceral. How many lives had Bennett destroyed behind his charming smile and polished speeches? How many more would suffer if she failed to stop him? Emily quickly dialed Grant's number, urgency vibrating through her fingers. Grant answered immediately, his voice tight, cautious. Emily wasted no time. "It's Richard Bennett," she whispered sharply, her voice thick with anger and urgency. "He's behind everything. Kyle Callahan, all of it." Grant drew a sharp breath, pausing briefly before responding. "Emily, Bennett's untouchable. He has connections everywhere, in politics, law enforcement, even inside City Hall. If we're going after him, we need airtight proof." Emily closed her eyes briefly, frustration swelling inside her. "We can't wait. If Bennett realizes we're onto him, he'll erase every trace. We need a plan. Now." Grant hesitated a moment, then his voice hardened with resolve. "Then we need to shake Bennett's confidence. Make him nervous enough to slip up. He thinks Callahan is safe, but what if he wasn't?" Emily's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You're suggesting we make Bennett believe Callahan's about to talk?" "Exactly," Grant replied. "We carefully leak information, just enough to worry Bennett, just enough to break his trust in Callahan. If Bennett believes Callahan will talk, he might reveal himself. It's risky, Emily, but it's our best shot." Emily nodded slowly, determination solidifying within her. They were walking a dangerous line, but she knew it was the only path toward true justice. "All right," she agreed quietly, her voice firm, confident despite her lingering fears. "Let's do it." As Emily ended the call, silence enveloped the room once more. Yet, it was different this time. A silence heavy with anticipation, charged with the quiet courage of her decision. Emily had faced prejudice, violence, betrayal. Now she stood against an enemy whose power was hidden beneath polished smiles and generous donations. Richard Bennett had fooled the entire city, wrapped in a cloak of wealth and respectability, manipulating others from the shadows. But now, Emily had seen behind the mask. She felt a quiet fury burn steadily inside her heart. She had faced prejudice and betrayal, endured loneliness and doubt, but in that moment, Emily found clarity. This was no longer just her mission. It had become deeply personal. She was fighting for Marcus, for every child Bennett had exploited, for everyone the system had failed. In that dimly lit room, beneath the faint hum of her computer screen and the quiet rhythm of rain tapping against the window pane, Emily made a silent promise to herself. Richard Bennett would answer for his crimes, no matter how powerful or untouchable he seemed. Her resolve was now stronger than ever. For Marcus, for every victim whose voice had been silenced, Emily would not rest until justice was served. Emily jolted awake as the phone buzzed violently beside her, shattering the fragile calm she'd managed to hold on to. Samuel Grant's voice burst urgently through the line, his tone sharp and clipped. "Emily, Bennett made his move. He sent men to silence Callahan. Hurry, I'm already en route." She was on her feet in seconds, heart pounding wildly as adrenaline surged through her veins. The betrayal she felt was overshadowed now by a fierce instinct to protect, to act. Within moments, she was speeding through the night, streetlights streaking past in a blur of anxiety and determination. When Emily arrived at Callahan's house, a terrible dread seized her. The front door hung open, splintered wood dangling like broken bones. From inside came the muted sounds of struggle, grunts, shouts, desperation echoing urgently through the halls. Emily drew her weapon cautiously, stepping quietly across the threshold, heart hammering in her chest. Inside, chaos reigned. Callahan lay crumpled against the wall, Cat bleeding and gasping for breath as two men loomed menacingly over him. Bennett's hired muscle, cold, ruthless professionals. Emily steadied herself, inhaling sharply before stepping boldly into the room. "Police! Drop your weapons!" she shouted with authority, her voice slicing sharply through the chaos. The men spun toward her, momentarily startled, eyes narrowing dangerously as they assessed their new adversary. Emily braced herself, heart racing as one attacker lunged toward her swiftly. Instinct took over. She dodged skillfully, her training sharpening every reflex. Punches were thrown, fists striking, blocking, deflecting, every movement precise, desperate, and fiercely driven by survival. In the blur of the fight, Emily felt more alive than ever before. Not merely fighting for her own life, but for every victim silenced, every life destroyed by the powerful men who hid behind their privilege. Her heartbeat pounded furiously as she finally subdued the last attacker, breathing heavily, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Silence returned, thick and heavy. Emily turned, seeing Callahan slumped painfully against the wall, bruised, trembling. He lifted his head slowly, eyes filled with shame and defeat, unable to meet her gaze. "Emily?" he whispered weakly, voice broken, eyes glistening with guilt. "I'm so sorry." She approached cautiously, her own heart breaking with each step. "Why, Callahan?" she asked softly, her voice trembling slightly. "Why did you betray everything you stood for? Why did you betray me?" He looked away painfully, tears forming in his eyes. Finally, with a voice barely above a whisper, he revealed the devastating truth. "My daughter, Emily. Bennett had her. He told me if I didn't cooperate, if I didn't help take you down, he would hurt her. I had no choice." Emily froze, the revelation piercing her heart like a blade. Callahan, her mentor, protector, the man who'd shielded her from prejudice and supported her dreams, had been forced into betrayal to protect his own daughter. Her anger softened into sorrowful understanding. In that heartbreaking confession, Emily saw clearly how deeply Bennett had twisted the bonds of loyalty and trust. "It was never about race," Callahan whispered, voice cracking. "I'd never turn on you because of that. Never. It was my little girl, Emily. I couldn't let anything happen to her." Emily swallowed painfully, gently squeezing his shoulder in reassurance. "I understand," she whispered, her anger slowly replaced by compassion. "I wish you'd trusted me, Callahan. We could have faced this together." Just then, Grant stepped into the house, assessing the scene with silent urgency. He glanced at Emily, then Callahan, understanding immediately what had transpired. Wordlessly, they devised their next move, a plan born of desperation and determination. Callahan, driven now by guilt and courage, agreed to confront Bennett face to face. Within hours, the trap was set. Bennett arrived unaware, confident as always, calm and impeccably dressed, his face the familiar picture of polished benevolence. He stood before Callahan, smiling confidently as he spoke. Hidden discreetly beneath Callahan's jacket, a recording device silently captured every chilling word. "You disappoint me, Peter," Bennett sneered coldly, his voice void of the public warmth he'd so carefully cultivated. "Did you really think you could outmaneuver me? People like you, you're expendable." Emily's fists clenched, listening in the shadows nearby. Rage burned through her veins, fierce yet controlled. Her heart ached for Callahan, for his daughter, for Marcus, for all those Bennett had ruthlessly destroyed in pursuit of power. She stepped forward, voice calm but strong, filled with quiet fury and resolve. "It's over, Bennett. We've got everything recorded. Your mask is gone." For the first time, fear flashed openly across Bennett's face, his carefully maintained composure crumbling rapidly. His eyes darted wildly, searching desperately for an escape that no longer existed. "You think this changes anything?" Bennett growled, voice shaking with barely concealed panic. "You're nothing. You'll never win against people like me." Emily met his gaze steadily, her voice calm yet unyielding. "This was never about me versus you, Richard. This is about justice. Something you believed you were beyond because power blinded you." Bennett fell silent, stunned into defeat, as Emily and Grant carefully led him outside toward awaiting authorities. Emily felt a quiet, powerful satisfaction deep within her, a victory not just for herself, but for Marcus, Callahan, and countless others whose voices had been silenced by privilege and prejudice. As she watched Bennett's defeat unfold beneath the flickering streetlights, Emily shared a glance with Callahan. He met her eyes, offering a silent, heartfelt nod, An apology, gratitude, and deep respect all conveyed without words. Emily finally exhaled, feeling relief and sadness intertwining gently in her chest. This wasn't merely about bringing down one corrupt man. It was about confronting the deeper corruption hidden behind trust and power. She knew this was only the beginning, yet tonight marked a profound turning point. Justice had finally found its voice, and Emily was determined to make sure it would never again be silenced. Days after Bennett's arrest, Emily stood in front of the courthouse, the glare of media lights illuminating her tired yet resolute face. She held in her hand a small recording device, a simple piece of technology that had unraveled the careful lies of a powerful man. As she pressed play, Richard Bennett's own cold voice echoed clearly through the speakers, confirming every dark truth he'd spent years hiding beneath a mask of benevolence. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd as the respected philanthropist's image crumbled instantly before them, replaced by something darker, uglier, and all too real. In the days that followed, headlines swept across the city. Bennett's criminal network collapsed rapidly under the weight of public outrage and relentless investigations. Justice had been served, but it came at a steep, painful cost. Emily's heart bore scars deeper than those visible on her body. The loss cut sharply through her soul when she discovered her closest friend within the department, someone she'd trusted implicitly, had been secretly reporting to Bennett all along. That betrayal stung bitterly, leaving her wondering if anyone she'd known had ever truly cared. Trust, it seemed, was the most fragile thing of all. Yet nothing haunted her more profoundly than Callahan's betrayal. Even knowing his reasons, his desperate need to protect his daughter could not fully ease the ache in her heart. He had been her anchor, the one steady voice guiding her through storms of prejudice and injustice from the very first days she entered the force. The realization that even Callahan, someone who had shaped her career and life, could be compromised, shook her faith profoundly. Emily knew her life had changed forever. Gone was the illusion of safety. Privacy had become an impossibility. The threat of retribution from those loyal to Bennett would shadow her every step. Peace, stability, a normal life, all things she had once hoped for, now seemed like distant dreams she could never fully grasp again. Yet even amidst the overwhelming loss and turmoil, Emily felt a quiet strength awakening inside her. She understood now, perhaps for the first time, what true courage meant. Not just standing strong in moments of danger, but choosing to act, despite knowing exactly how painful the consequences could be. She cleared her throat, stepping forward confidently, her voice steady, yet tinged with gentle vulnerability as she spoke into the microphones waiting patiently in front of her. We think of justice as something given to us, as something we can passively wait for, she said clearly, her words measured, firm, and heartfelt. But the truth is, justice isn't passive. It's an active choice. It requires courage. It demands sacrifice. Emily paused, eyes glistening with emotion as memories flooded her mind. Marcus's smile, Callahan's mentorship, the bitter sting of betrayal, and the painful wounds it left behind. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, the weight of every painful memory grounding her words. Yes, the price can be heavy, she continued softly, her voice rich with quiet dignity. I've lost friendships I once cherished, seen trust broken by people I deeply respected, and I live knowing my life may never again be safe or simple. But standing here now, I know I made the right choice. Emily raised her head, eyes shining with determination and hope. She allowed her voice to grow stronger, carrying conviction beyond her own pain and speaking directly to those silently struggling everywhere. Justice isn't found in courtrooms alone, she concluded gently. It lives in each of us. It's in every brave choice we make, even when it costs us dearly. Because true justice demands action, even if that action comes with a heavy price. As she stepped away from the microphones, a gentle silence settled over the gathered crowd. For the first time, Emily felt something warm, something healing, hope. She knew her journey wasn't over. The scars she carried would always remain. But she also knew something far more powerful. Her voice had mattered. It had been heard, and now finally, it was beginning to echo louder than the silence of fear. And perhaps, in the end, it was what truly mattered most. Thank you so much for joining us today. If Emily's story touched your heart or inspired you in any way, Please take a moment to like this video. Your support truly helps stories like this reach others who need to hear them. And if you believe in spreading awareness, please share Emily's story with your friends and family, because every voice matters. Don't forget to click subscribe and join our community for more powerful stories about courage, justice, and hope. Together, let's keep these important stories alive.